Hello everybody, welcome to TEDx at Hoggard High School. Today we'll be hearing from several Hoggard students with a passion for furthering student involvement and empowerment, in fighting for LGBT and minority rights, regulating technology, and improving education. I'd like to thank our faculty sponsor, Ms. Herman, as well as all the speakers and other staff members for making this event possible. For those watching or listening, additional resources for all speeches are available in the description, and I hope that we can inspire you with the ideas we felt were worth spreading. Thank you so much for attending. Our first speaker will be Anders Olsen with his speech, The Problem with Social Media.
Social media. The majority of our population has it. Our society is run by it, and we are controlled by it. 40% of the entire world's population, around 3 billion people, use online social media every single day. The average American spends 144 minutes each day on social media. And if we account for 8 hours of sleep, then that means we're spending 1/8 of our entire waking life on social media. Social media is proven to be dangerous to our health. It destroys attention spans, it creates depression, and it wastes massive amounts of time and life. Social media can be pictured as a slot machine for dopamine, the happiness chemical. Dopamine is the same chemical released by eating a cookie, doing meth, or scrolling social media. Humans spend much of their time looking for either short or long-term releases for dopamine. Social media has been able to corrupt that natural response. Social media provides people with the ability to spend an infinite amount of time looking for a dopamine release. People attempt to get this dopamine release by permanently searching for the next funny picture or funny video or funny message. We just click and click and click until we finally get a hit of that precious dopamine. School activities, jobs, and social interaction require social media. Our entire world relies on the use of social media. But social media is slowly destroying us. The average person now has a slower attention span than that of a goldfish. Starting in the year 2000, an experiment was run to determine the exact attention span of humans. They were able to scan the brain using an EEG to determine the exact amount of time it took to switch our focus. In the very beginning of the experiment, in the year 2000, humans had an average attention span of 12 seconds. Now, after years of encouraging our brains to become more dependent on technology, we have an 8-second attention span. The goldfish, with the brain designed not to do much more than eat and swim, has an attention span of 9 seconds. One more than modern-day humans. What took hundreds of thousands of years to carefully evolve in humans was wiped out by 20 years of bad mental habits. We lost 1/3 of our brain's attention span, and it was due to endless stimulation of social media. The human species has severely cognitively declined, and it is a result of our own doing. The social media industry is causing harms to our brain. These social media companies are trying to addict their customers, not help them. There is absolutely no incentive to create a positive, non-addictive, functionalist social media. When Facebook was first designing their platform, they originally had blue notification notices, and no one paid much attention to them. But then they recolored it to red, the color of blood, the color of danger, the color that grabs our attention beyond anything else. They were able to exponentially increase participant engagement beyond anything else. This explains the basic mentality behind social media platforms. They are going to tailor every single pixel to keep you coming back to the platform again and again. It is also important to remember that these companies are not fundamentally malicious. They have no ill will towards the everyday consumer. Their singular goal is to get you to spend the greatest amount of time possible on your platform and harvest the greatest amount of data from you. All other objectives are meaningless in pursuit of this one. The very second it becomes profitable to create systems that create communities, inform consumers, and improve lives, the system will change. But right now, there is no built-in incentive for these companies to provide safe outlets. The motivation for companies has to come from us. We need to provide the incentive for social media companies to develop safe, non-addictive practices that will enhance our lives instead of destroying them. It is our responsibility as consumers to be informed of the practices of these companies and reward the systems which benefit us and punish those who may hurt us.
Our next speaker is Celeste Powers with her speech, Heteronormativity in Public Schools.
Today, I'm going to be talking about someone who is very special to me, my little brother Luke. He's a freshman in high school, and he loves beauty and nail polish and makeup. He is taller than me, like he's 14 and he is 6 foot, which I think is insane, but it's also super helpful whenever I need something up high. Luke and I have never been super close. As kids, we never spilled secrets or anything, but I did know that when I grew up, I was going to have to make sure that he felt loved and accepted no matter what, and let him know that he's perfect just the way he is. He is always kind to whoever he meets, and he tries his hardest to make everybody feel accepted no matter what. He isn't afraid to be himself, and he seems to not care what other people think about him. He enjoys going to school, and he loves Scouts. He tries his best to be as good of a person as he can possibly be, taking others into account before himself. He tries to make everybody involved no matter the situation, which is something that I really admire. Luke loves to do dance and do his makeup. He's always posting on social media all of these crazy makeup looks that I could never do in my whole life, but he somehow makes them look so beautiful. He has huge ambitions for his future. He wants to create his own makeup line, inclusive for every person, every skin type, every skin color, every style. He has big dreams and he has a plan on how to do it. I believe that he will go places in his life. I have never met a person, or let alone a 14-year-old, who is this positive and has their future as planned out as Luke does. He knows exactly what classes he needs to take, when he needs to take them, what he wants to major in, what college he wants to go to, and what steps he has to do to make sure he gets where he wants to go. Unfortunately, not everybody likes his big dreams. He struggles with being bullied. Luke used to wear nail polish to school when he was younger, but the amount of bullying he received from his peers deterred him. He feared for his own safety from their threats if he continued to wear nail polish to school. He couldn't wear nail polish because it was not socially acceptable for a middle school-aged boy to make nail polish to school. He also feared that the 8th graders and high schoolers would beat him up if he wore it. Luke has always had a love of makeup, as I mentioned, ever since he was a little kid. When we were kids, Luke and I would dress up, put on princess dresses, and pretend we were princesses ruling everything we could see. Luke and I had so much fun when we were kids. Luke wanted to wear makeup to school one time, but he didn't understand why my mom and I would not let him. The truth is, I didn't want Luke to get beat up. We rode the bus with these super aggressive and super mean and loud and annoying boys who didn't like anyone who's not the same as them. They would bully everybody, but they would especially bully Luke. They would constantly tear down Luke over the smallest things, from the games on his phone to what he would talk about. I tried everything I could think of to stop these boys, but nothing worked. They would physically bully Luke like hit him with various objects. They would flip his hood up and pull his hair, and he would tell them to stop, and then would threaten to tell administration and teachers and the bus driver, and they would not stop bullying him. The administration did nothing about it. He kept being relentlessly bullied by these obnoxious boys who were insecure about themselves, all because he was different from them. Luke has always been secure in who he is and does not care what other people think about him. One time, last school year, Luke saw this 6th grade boy who was wearing makeup to school in the hallway heading to the bathroom. Luke wanted to compliment this boy on his makeup. When Luke went into the bathroom, the boy hid his face in fear of Luke. By the time that Luke was going to talk to this boy, the boy had already left the bathroom, presumably scared. Luke is a pretty large boy. As I mentioned, he's 6 foot. He has some muscle on him from being a dancer. This 6th grader felt fearful that Luke was going to beat him up. When Luke saw this kid at a different time at school, this boy again hid his face in fear of what people were going to say when they saw his makeup. All Luke wanted to do was compliment the boy and ask him about his makeup, and the boy feared for his safety and ran away. It's heartbreaking. Bullying starts at a young age, but is made worse throughout schooling. Middle school is, the standard point when kids are trying to experiment and figure out who they are and what they want to do. And it is crucial to who they are. They feel pressure to fit in from their peers. I've always said that middle school is the meanest time of a person's life, and I truly believe that. If someone is different from what they think is normal, they will automatically go after that person and attack them because they feel that they need to make that person feel badly about themselves so that they will come form and fit in. There is the most bullying in middle school because of the amount of insecurities there are. It is so sad that people feel they cannot be themselves because they will get bullied if they try. And they're afraid to stand up for the person being bullied because they're worried they will get bullied themselves. Insecurity is the main reason behind all bullying, and there is tons of it in middle school. Boys face pressure to be perfect. Football players, manly, dating a different girl every week, middle school things. The pressures placed on boys to be perfect can lead to insecurities, especially if the boy is not manly. Luke is the opposite of what you would think of as manly. Orchestra kid, dance, he loves science, makeup, nail polish, not what I would call your typical manly middle schooler. The bullies pick on the different kids because it's easier for them. Why would you pick on the football player when you could pick on, the dancer? Unfortunately, boys are more likely to bully people than girls. Additionally, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services states that boys tend to engage in more physical forms of bullying and sexual harassment than girls do. Therefore, being different and not what the ideal man looks like in middle and high school can prove unsafe and even dangerous. That discourages people from feeling like they can be themselves, which does not encourage individuality and freedom of expression. Bullying makes people want to fit in more, and they will do anything to avoid being bullied themselves. When bullying happens in excess, suicide can occur. Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death among adolescents, according to the Child Mind Institute. 3rd. LGBTQ youth who reported having at least one accepting adult were 40% less likely to report a suicide attempt in the past year, according to the Trevor Project. 40%. The impact of bullying later on in life is extremely terrifying. Bullying in middle school can lead to depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and in some cases, self-harm. Kids feel sad and depressed because they get bullied for being themselves. As I previously mentioned, bullying stems from insecurities. The popular kids bully the not popular kids because they don't like people being comfortable with themselves and being different from what they think is normal. The kids who get bullied tend to not understand why they're being bullied. They're just being who they are. Society tells these kids that they have to be a certain way, and if they're not, they're going to get bullied for it. When something isn't the way that society says it will be, other people step in and are like, you cannot be different. You have to conform to what society wants you to do. The reason for making someone feel bad is so that they will blend in and fit in better. Bullying is seen as cool and popular because it's perceived as being needed to thrive in school. That is not the case. Children can learn not to bully those around them and not treat people differently just because someone has different hobbies than them. There is something called the bystander effect. The idea that someone can be suffering and other people don't do anything about it because they think that someone else is going to step in and fix it. That is not a good way to stop anything. I know that I would want someone to step in for me in that situation. Staying silent is just as bad as bullying someone, because then the bullies think that what they're doing is okay and they can continue to bully more people. I've come up with a solution to the bullying issue. Educate. Schools should create programs where students are separated into small groups, age, gender, something, I don't know, sexual orientation, small groups, and taught about tolerance and how to deal with people who are different than them. Kids should be taught not to bully anybody, and that all schools should have a zero tolerance bullying policy. This program can start when kids are in elementary school. That way, it's implemented into their brain, and they are more tolerant when they get to be Luke's age. Luke used to be very insecure and would care a lot about what his peers were saying about him, but now he's gotten so used to this bullying that he doesn't even register it anymore. It doesn't even faze him. He also says he's put up a wall and needs to get to know someone first before he starts opening up to them and letting them get to know the real him. Is that really a good thing? Is that what we want our kids to be like?
Our next speaker is Andrew Braun with his speech, Reshaping America's Cities for an Efficient Future.
For Americans, cars seem to be a never-ending nightmare. They're expensive, they pollute, and they even kill, of course. But beyond general disappointments, cars are doing something far worse. They're creating sprawl. Cars are rapidly propelling cities outward and spreading the population thin so that our cities eventually become one widespread, never-ending, mangled mess and shape. They have been the bullet fired from the gun of disregard for conservation and practicality that has defined American urban planning for decades. But why do our cities look the shapes that they do now? Why do they look this way? Well, city planning and infrastructure is a pretty special topic, so I think the best way to get this point across is visually. Let's look at a city in Europe, for example. The largest European cities were founded and developed hundreds of years before those in the U.S., hundreds of years before cars and buses and trains existed. This meant that cities were developed to give the walker the convenience of a hub-and-spoke or grid system to get around more effectively. Now let's look at a comparable U.S. city, population-wise, let's say Chicago. It's a city founded in the 1800s that grew during the Industrial Revolution and suburbanized with the rest of America later on. If you look at American cities' downtown areas, you'll most likely see a grid system as well, because these were the first planned parts of cities where everyone lived and worked. It was this convenient layout that welcomed networks like the New York City subway and San Francisco cable car system to booming cities. These systems didn't have to go as far as they do now. Now add a car to this whole equation. If that typical city dweller who took the trolley or simply walked to work wanted to venture beyond their urban habitat for a weekend getaway, they could do so on a budget. They could do it pretty easily. Families had the freedom to vacation very inexpensively and could travel for hundreds of miles each day while doing so. They could live in neighborhoods away from the hustle and bustle of their big, loud cities and drive into work every day from somewhere else. After everyone had acquired a car by the middle of the 20th century, America suburbanized. New neighborhoods and subdivisions popped up far away from business centers because people now had the freedom to live or to not live in the crowded city centers. To connect all of these neighborhoods to one another, to the new business centers naturally being created, we had to build new roads. And they winded all around, and along these roads we built more neighborhoods and more subdivisions. Beltways built for car travelers wanted to bypass the city's general traffic, served as a geographical border for major cities. and so more homes were constructed either alongside or even beyond them, farther and farther and farther away from the city center, meaning people had to drive farther and farther and farther to do some of the things they do on a regular basis, including going to work. The efficiency of our dense cities was lost as millions migrated to the suburbs. Now skip ahead to the year 2020 as opposed to the 1950s. 5 billion people of the world population will be living in cities in the next 10 years, and a lot of that growth is happening right here in the United States. An estimated 10 million more Americans will be living in cities by 2030 than currently are. Still, that's 86% of the country's population will be living in urban or suburban areas. Given our current developmental practices, our cities are in for a rough ride. Those millions of people joining mass metro areas will most likely end up in the suburbs, where that freedom of car is the only way to get around. More people stemming out into and from the suburbs means less high-density expansion, meaning that the more we continue to build out without building up, means that we'll only keep building out and taking up land. That puts a lot of stress on cities. Congestion is only going to get worse. Mobility is going to be even more of an everyday struggle as a result. Utilities like water and electricity will have to become more extensive in physical size, which becomes more expensive to build and maintain, and really inconvenient if lines break. Massive metro areas like Phoenix expand and expand without definite borders. Beltways and surrounding subdivisions encircle city centers like rings in a tree trunk. Human development stretches on for miles and miles that can be seen from space practically, and the reason that suburban metropolises flourish is because of their dependence on cars. In a more foreign term, lack of mass transportation options. For one moment, let's put Phoenix up against another place. Let's compare Phoenix to somewhere of comparable size, let's say the San Francisco Bay Area. Both places grew considerably in the 19th century, but certainly experienced the suburbanization of the 1950s onward. Here's the difference about these two places, though. The Phoenix Metro takes up 15,000 square miles of land, while the Bay Area itself only takes up less than 2,500 square miles. How did these cities get to be so different if they're so alike then? If they're so alike in population, how do they get to be so massive? Well, Phoenix's transit system, Valley Metro Transit, was founded 20 years later than the Bay Area Rapid Transit System, or the BART. Additionally, the BART was ranked as the third best rapid transit system in the nation by Business Insider, as well as the 11th cheapest. While Valley Metro didn't place in the top 50 for quality of transit systems, and Phoenix is considered the third most expensive to get around. The slam dunk? San Francisco's density has increased over the last 10 years significantly, while increases in mobility for people, however, they get around, namely by walking and transit. When comparing two similar U.S. cities, it's easy to see that the one with the longer-lasting, nationally ranked mass transit system resulted in the use of over 80% less than the alternative. There's a legitimate relationship between quality, mobility, and conservation. The solution here is mass transit. Communal transportation is the absolute most efficient existing alternative to cars if ever-growing dense cities and surrounding metro areas want to develop efficiently. It is undeniable that while in the numerous way that cars continue to fail humans, mass transit prevails. But despite facts like the U.S. gives off over half of the world's car emissions, or that 36,000 American lives were claimed by cars last year, or over 2 million Americans suffered permanent injuries in car crashes, let's look more into the benefits of mass transit. Let's move away from the negatives and let's look on the bright side for a minute. Along these more accessible streets that we'll be creating, businesses are going to prosper because there is a direct correlation, according to studies, between this large-scale community investment and economic growth. For every $10 million in capital investment put into mass transit, a $32 million increase in local business sales has been recorded. And for every $1 billion invested into $1 billion invested into public transportation projects, 50,000 new jobs are created and sustained. 50,000. That's the size of a small city. That's 50,000. But besides economic benefits, mass transit, even with investment far less than that of the San Francisco area, it's user-friendly on a very personal level. People can get their work done as they commute and rarely have to deal with the uncontrollable variables of traffic. If you aren't in the driver's seat, then you aren't as much in harm's way or a candidate for being in an accident on your way both to and from work, statistics show. But in order to improve that quality, we have to move past the cause and effect relationship between low ridership and low quality. Lower ridership affects community awareness, and that affects funding, which puts less people not on trains and buses. But if we break that cycle, if we can just get into the community's routine of going to work on a bus or a train, then transit systems can get the money they need, be it from revenue or increased public investment, to improve the quality. Now, notice that I've categorized the solution as this car problem as mass transit. Mass transit, not public transit. That's typically what we hear when talking about this issue, mass transit. The reason I say this is because in the case of most sprawling mid-sized American cities where we need to tackle this issue, or we're seeing this issue, I don't believe that local governments have the means to take it on right now. And I don't think they have the right to essentially nationalize an industry. We need to take this message to where the money is, to the companies who already have launched major technology-based, environmentally driven innovation projects. Companies like Amazon, whose customer base stretches across the entire nation, has billions of dollars to put into new ventures, and who are willing to execute this sort of transportation reformation. If these companies value the future, they'll hop on board. And I'm not a pessimistic person. I'm pragmatic. I'm not drawn to talk to you about this issue because I'm a prominent environmental activist, although I very much am aware of global warming. And it's certainly not because I want to explain to you how to spend your money. It's because this starts on a grassroots level. I want our cities to be more sustainable for the future, and I want us to cut down on some of our wants to fulfill some of our more important needs. This is an issue of not only basic conservation and planning, but of efficiency. It is the reality that we can shape our cities with mass transit in the practical way that we want, with higher density and less sprawl. And at the same time, we can cut down on emissions and maybe save some lives. The great thing about this alternative is that we know what to do. We know how to implement it. We, for the most part, know how to make it sustainable, and we know all of its facets. But now it's time to convince our communities, big and small, that it's the viable alternative. Do your own research on this topic, because there is so much that I didn't mention in this presentation today. Lobby your city governments about the importance of these systems and have them apply for state and federal grants to either improve, extend, or totally revamp their local public transit. We can take society and make this work with the right motivation for building and keeping efficiency. If we can give up a bit of our independence made possible by cars for our commute to work and school every day, maybe we can save money that we don't spend on constantly refueling gas tanks for monotonous city driving. Maybe we can cut down on emissions like we've never seen before. Maybe we can keep that only half century of oil left around for a bit longer than what has been projected. Adopting mass transportation as our primary or even a dramatically close secondary mode of transportation in cities is how we solve many large issues that we face today, including the climate crisis. And in time is how we will correct the shapes of our cities to become far more efficient. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ian Condon with his speech, The Disenfranchisement of Public School Students.
Our school systems have many problems, but there's one problem that is more important and impactful than any other, especially in this day and age. It's a problem of representation. Imagine if you were impoverished and your life was run by the rich. Imagine if you were black and your decisions were made by whites. Imagine if you were a student, and your education, your passions, and your entire future was run by adults who don't know what it's like to learn in the 21st century. The idea of democracy and equal rights for all people has been drilled into our heads for our entire academic career. Yet why is it that we are seen as naive and inferior by our all-powerful elders? Not only during the pandemic, but throughout our entire schooling, we have seen corruption, hypocrisy, and sheer incompetence in school administration, which raises some serious questions about the validity of their authority. The average age for a member of school administration is 59, and it's 60 for politicians. Look around you right now. We have reached a point where the elders who were considered the experts of the past are falling behind due to rapid change. And now especially, our social lives are online, our work is online, this is online, and most importantly, our schools are online. We have put the power to manage students' lives into the hands of the people who now are completely unable to. Why are we being taught how to save the planet by the generation that created more pollution than any before them? Why are we being repeatedly told about the maladies of bigotry and discrimination by the proponents of widespread racism themselves? Is it because they are more experienced or knowledgeable than us? No, of course not. Let me remind you that we are putting our trust in the peoples whose financial ineptitude raised the national debt to 60% of the entire US GDP. Their incompetence made them owe $3.7 trillion in personal debt, is allowing only 38% of them to retire with a pension. And especially in this age of rapid technological advancement and extensive awareness in environmental and social fields, do we really expect these people, the generations who have grown up dumping their recycling in the ocean, who have restricted gays from buying houses or getting jobs, and who still don't know how to change from HDMI 1 to HDMI 2? Do we expect these people to create adequate laws, regulations, and guidelines in order to govern respectfully and justly, instead of tyrannizing others? So why is it that after years of evolution and progressive change, that we were being taught and scolded and disenfranchised by the generation that conveniently forgets that we, the students and the oppressed, have to fix the mistakes that they made? And it seems that our society has unknowingly accepted the mainstream fact that once again, the people who are affected by the decisions and changes don't get to have a say in them. We're seeing history repeat itself. Just like the unnaturalized African Americans, Native Americans, women, citizens of US territories, we are constantly being bound and gagged when we want to say something that will actually influence our lives. We have apparently gotten used to the enveloping control of teachers and other administration when we speak about change publicly. In the student council and school change boards, we have no power. In our young Democrat and Republican clubs, we incite no change. And in the debate and speech club, we debate and give speeches as if it were a game. In the last decade, inclusion in schools and in the workplace has increased by 37%, with benefits in open-mindedness, productivity, and creativity being shown clearly. It is accepted that diversity in race, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, and religion leads to a stronger society. However, youth inclusion is still not even considered. But it's not solely our superior elders' faults. We, on our own accord, have accepted the fact that we have no power and are letting our voices be suppressed by our ignorant leaders. We let the older generations characterize us as entitled vape and phone addicts, yet we do nothing to counter that characterization. We willingly and repeatedly drive ourselves into our master's oppressive grasp. We're essentially feeding the beast, allowing these monstrously disconnected people to brainwash us in their scramble for power. We can't complain about our lack of voice if we are restricting our own voices. So I beseech you to not feed the beast, to go out and find a way to make a change, to wriggle out of its grasp and seek and point out the issues. Join youth-led organizations such as the New Hanover County Student Union. Volunteer for candidates you believe in. Discover your voice again in order to give the youth the opportunity to make a change in our community for the greater good. Thank you.
Since March, as we all know, we have been for the most part trapped in our home. Schools, workplaces, and more have shut down due to COVID-19. Businesses minimize in-person business. Work is no longer done from a workplace, and people are shuttered inside their homes. This has made the economy struggle and caused unemployment to rise as people stay home to prevent transmission of the disease. However, out of this economist's nightmare has risen a beautiful dream from a climatologist's perspective. Recently, things have been looking bleak for environmentalists in the U.S. Environmental regulations have been loosened under the current administration. We've pulled out of the world's largest environmental agreement, the Paris Climate Accord, and 2019 was the second hottest year on record and at the highest amount of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere of any year on record, with 36.8 billion tons being released. In 2020, it looked like things were going to be no different until the coronavirus pandemic. This world-changing event dropped carbon emissions to their lowest rates in years early in 2020. The societal disruption caused by social distancing caused global carbon emissions to plummet 17% in the first 3.5 months of the year as compared to 2019. Even in incredibly industrialized countries like China, where there are less strict environmental regulations, emissions have drastically reduced. The use of personal transportation, like cars, has essentially ended as people wait for a vaccine. Vehicles for international transportation, like commercial airliners, have similarly fallen out of use as people avoid travel. Less electricity has been used in workplaces and businesses because of their shutdown, as well, which has further reduced carbon emissions. All these factors combined add up to the unprecedented drop in carbon emissions of 17%. Though 17% might not seem like a lot, it's actually a huge deal in carbon emissions. Imagine if you were told to drive almost 20% less, use 20% less electricity, and pay the extra 20% of attention to your carbon-releasing activities. Then imagine if you had to get billions of other people to do it. Controlling carbon emissions might not seem hard as an individual, but to get an entire society to do this at once in almost perfect unison is nearly impossible. Compare this to the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. The goal of that accord was to reduce global carbon emissions by 7.6% every year. Following this figure, we would have already reduced emissions by over double what we needed if we kept up these levels and continued lowered rates of emission. The 17% is a huge step towards what we would need to do to slow global warming. Though this sharp drop in emissions might not continue at its current pace once social distancing restrictions are completely lifted, it does give us hope. Even when our country was part of the Paris Climate Agreement and was consciously making an effort to reduce emissions, there was not a drop this great. Granted, there are some unusual circumstances at play. However, despite that, this is still an unprecedented lowering of emissions. Before this, harbors of complacency might deem the attempt to greatly lower carbon emissions a fruitless venture. Many deemed the task impossible, choosing the easy path of continuing to slide down the slippery slope of allowing monumental climate change to happen. However, now there's no excuse for complacency. The drop in carbon emissions caused by the quarantine has shown that large-scale societal movements away from high carbon emissions are possible, if only they have the right motivation. Global warming has the potential to kill off most of the species on Earth, make agriculture difficult, and make our Earth nearly uninhabitable. Why can't people find as much motivation in this long-term threat as they do in the immediate demand of coronavirus? It is true that people will not be quarantined at home forever, and someday they will have to return to using personal transportation, going to work, and traveling all over the world. However, the proof remains. We do have the ability to lower our carbon footprint if we put our collective minds to it. No more are the excuses that these goals are unrealistic. With this knowledge, everyone should know that they can change their carbon emissions for the better. Though this drop may be temporary, it will be a long-standing obelisk of how it is possible for us to reduce carbon emissions and how we can reverse global warming.
Our next speaker is Jacob Jarrett with his speech, Racist Jokes Are Still Racist.
At some point in time, every Black person encounters the N-word. No matter who you are or where you come from, you hear it. It's not always grand or exciting or dramatic, but it happens. A kid on your sports team, your classmate on the bus, a party with some loud rap. My first encounter was somehow more underwhelming than any of those. It wasn't from a Klansman, it wasn't from someone's parents, it wasn't even from a Trump supporter. For me, it was in a YouTube video. About 5 years ago now, I was watching funny videos with my friend. I couldn't tell you who or what, but I could tell you that I heard a word I never thought I'd hear. In that moment, I felt a mess of emotions. I was confused. I was a bit anxious. I didn't quite get it, but then I turned to my friend and he was chuckling. In response to a 20-something-year-old white guy on the internet saying the N-word, he smiled and laughed. In this little tidbit of internet racism, he found humor. Now, let's fast forward to early 2020 when I started thinking about this. I could not walk across the cafeteria at my school without hearing something racist. Sometimes it was just the N-word with an A, a hard R, some other variation. Oftentimes, though, it was a bit of more complex racial humor. Some joke at the expense of a minority group. In the year 2020, I could not walk across my school's cafeteria without hearing something racist. Let that sink in. I could not walk across the cafeteria in a public high school in 2020 without hearing a racist comment. It's not all reserved for the schoolhouse, though. It follows us through online games, onto YouTube, and into social media. As frequently as people do make racist remarks hidden under the guise of a joke in real life, they make astronomically more online. The online disinhibition effect makes us more likely to say things we wouldn't ordinarily say through social media because a screen distances you from other people. And the result? Offensive memes running rampant across the internet. Now, I'm going to digress for a second here, but bear with me. For a bit of context to make sure everyone is caught up, in the simplest terms possible, memes are jokes. They derived from Richard Dawkins' definition, which was a unit of cultural transmission. But as we understand them now, memes are primarily jokes or tidbits of humor spread between people over the internet. Similar, but slightly different. Spread in order to make their friends happy, spread in order to make yourself seem funny, spread in order to get likes and validation. You've seen them before. There are minion memes, cat memes, and a whole lot of others. Anyway, this is all fine on the surface, of course, because really there's nothing inherently wrong with a 13-year-old seeking likes to bolster their diminishing ego, but a problem arises when we get into how likes can be quickly acquired. In this digital age when the human attention span appears to be declining, in order to get a lot of likes, you have to compete against millions of other people for your viewers' attention. That means that while someone is scrolling or swiping through their feed or their Explore page, you're competing to catch their attention and make them stop long enough to like your post. So while a lot of wholesome memes do exist, memes that employ a shock factor are very present and very real too. It's a total coincidence that Slim Jim and Big Chungus are popular memes. At no point did anyone in 2020 see an abnormally large Bugs Bunny from 80 years ago and start genuinely laughing at it. It's not entirely pure comedy. It's a convoluted form of shock humor. The jokes arose from the absurdity of the humor, shocking those who saw it. And they faded into obscurity once that absurdity was played out. Shock humor isn't always so simple, though. It's not always so clean. It is socially taboo to be racist. Even racists don't like to be called that. They prefer the term race realist. No one is supposed to say racist things or express racist ideas online because society has determined that those things are bad. Everyone my age knows that genuine bona fide racism is a disgusting thing, which means that no one would ever expect for you to be that. People can adjust themselves to expect anything you have to throw at them if you're just throwing something silly and random around. What they'll never expect, though, is you to say, "Get back to picking cotton." They'll never expect anyone to type, "guacamole N-word penis." In other words, edgy humor found on a 13-year-old white boy's TikToks finds its staying power in the racism and the inherent shock value that it has. What we ought to realize, though, is that everyone involved in a meme transaction is a human being, usually a young person, and what they say online cannot stay online. I acknowledged the online disinhibition effect earlier, and it still has its merits. Yes, people are more likely to say stuff through a screen than they would in real life, but what they say online does set a precedent for what they say in person. Chonkers, femboy, weeaboo, these aren't words that entered the high school's vocabulary from nowhere. They became popular online and then they became popular in real life. According to a Virginia Tech study, the percentage of people aged 15 to 21 exposed to extremist content online rose 13% from 2013 to 2016. This means that 7 in 10 of us were exposed to extremist ideas in 2016. So, much like femboys and big chunks and other internet trends, it follows that racist jokes sneak into reality, which takes me back to 2020. In the cafeteria, waiting in line for lunch, when someone yells a hard R. Essentially, we, referring to Generation Z, have entered a state where, despite being a group of people totally morally opposed to racism, are comfortable with being racist as long as it's for a joke. In our addiction to social media, in our shortened attention spans, in our pursuit of validation from internet strangers, racist jokes have thrived. And there are a whole host of problems associated with it. First, let's take off our humor lenses for a second. If a white man looked at me with a dirty look on his face and said we should bring back slavery, he would be racist, right? He would be chastised by those around him. His behavior would be generally frowned upon. Society would not condone his actions. He said a racist thing. He expressed a racist sentiment. There was something inherently wrong with him saying those words. It demeans me. It carries a history of negative connotations. It perpetuated racial tensions. If we were to change the circumstances a little, let's see the white man is an acquaintance of mine, and a situation arises, it's a true story, where he says we should bring back slavery, and everyone starts laughing. The racist statement is still racist. Nothing about the sentence changes. I am still hurt and damaged by him saying it. No matter how the context or intent changes, the racism stays racist, and the negative effects persist. It still hurts me. It still carries a negative history. I mean, it's about slavery, for crying out loud. It still increases racial tension. All our normalization of racist jokes does is give white men a filter through which they can express their internalized biases. Some people will argue that it's not all bad, though. Some people will tell you that it toughens us up, which it does. Those with more exposure to racist humor respond more positively in the face of racism, and that can be interpreted as taking power away from racists. But does it? Is me not being angered by racists taking power away from them? Is their goal to make me mad? The way I see it, all it does is disarm me. When I'm berated with racist jokes and I don't have the energy to fight back anymore, all it does is make it less likely for me to argue when someone is going on a tangent about ethno-states. What's worse, even if I did find a way to selectively argue with the genuine racist out there, because of the way we perceive humor, they could play it off as a joke. It's one thing if a black comedian wants to make fun of the notion of racism and wrest racist power from the hands of the oppressor. But if Ricky from Alabama says it, it's a very different story. I mean, for starters, a white guy being racist meets my expectations, so it wouldn't have any real shock value. That was a joke. But more importantly, it's no longer about making fun of racism. It's about desensitizing us to it. Which, once again, takes me back to 2020. This is the last time. I reached a point in my life where someone yelling the N-word with a hard R did not faze me. Over the span of 5 years, as I and my peers became more and more immersed in internet culture and internet humor, I gradually became so desensitized to racism that a loud, brazen hard R did not shake my conscience. Ever since my first moment of awkward hesitation and eventual refusal to say anything, I seem to have dug myself further and further into a hole of racist humor, and at that point I blamed myself. I struggled with regret for a very long time. Regret that since 6th grade, I smiled and I nodded and I laughed at everything offensive so that my peers wouldn't hate me. That's a lot of regret for a high schooler to bear by themselves, let alone a middle schooler. Yes, we should all be more firm in our opposition to racist humor. No, we shouldn't try to maintain pleasantries with smiles and chuckles when faced with racism. But how can you expect middle and high schoolers to fight racism when they don't know what's a joke and what's real? How can you expect young people, children, to stand up for themselves when they get called triggered whenever they do? How can you expect racism to ever end when the shield of a troll face protects every racist? How can you expect a middle schooler to look a shark in the maw and then have the courage or skill to defang it? You can't. At some point, I needed to consider that maybe the kids telling me to pick cotton were at fault, and I shouldn't have had to correct them. Maybe the kids asking me for the N-word passes were wrong, and that's final. They're wrong. Maybe the only duty I have is to myself, and their failure to see their issues is on them. The burden falls on the white parents who gave their kids unrestricted access to social media before they're old enough to manage it for themselves. The white children who, in their pursuit of likes, never thought to consider our perspectives and rejected any criticisms we had. The white memers who promote and push this garbage content that has aided in the destruction of a woke generation. Now, I've done my part. I've stood my ground. At this point, the burden falls on each and every one of you in the audience who is racist at my expense, and the duty is to fix that behavior. And the duty to fix that behavior rests firmly on your shoulders. I'd like everyone my age who makes offensive jokes to stop for a second. If you don't think you make them, you probably do, because we all do. So just stop for a second and think about the people you're touching. Think about how helpless they are to defend themselves. Think about the little black boy surrounded by all his white classmates. Think about the issues that your jokes bring along with them and empathize with us, all of us, and make an effort to help us be free from racism. Thank you.